A reading now from Matthew's Gospel, the 16th chapter. Listen now, friends, for the word of the Lord. Now, when Jesus came to the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man," that is Jesus, "is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." But he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God indeed. So we begin today with a parable from the Far East. Once there was a Chinese farmer who worked his poor farm together with his son and their horse. When the horse ran off one day, neighbors came to say, "How unfortunate you are." The farmer replied, "Maybe yes, maybe no." When the horse returned, followed by a herd of wild horses, the neighbors gathered around and exclaimed, "What good luck for you!" The farmer stayed calm and replied, "Maybe yes, maybe no." While trying to tame one of the wild horses, the farmer's son fell and broke his leg. He had to rest up and couldn't help with the farm chores. "How sad for you," the neighbors cried. "Maybe yes, maybe no," said the farmer. Shortly thereafter, a neighboring army threatened the farmer's village. All the young men in the village were drafted to fight the invaders. Many died, but the farmer's son had been left out of the fighting because of his broken leg. People said to the farmer, "What a good thing it is your son couldn't fight." "Maybe yes, maybe no," was all the farmer said. I love that story. I mean, whether you are a glass half empty or a glass half full kind of person, the parable defies both, right? And I love it. I mean, there are times perhaps for the wise caution of the realist, and then there are times for the hope and energy of the optimist, but then there are also times when we just don't know, and it bears some patience and reflection. Now, for Peter, this morning in our passage in Matthew, this is not one of those times. Peter knows. He knows already who Jesus is. The Father has told him. And so he proclaims when Jesus asks, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter speaks up. "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And just like we said last week, it's not what goes into our mouths that defines or defiles us. It is the things that come out of our mouths, the things that flow out from our heart. Remember we were talking about Jesus confronted the religious authorities of the day and said that, you have to ritually wash your hands before you eat, and you have to eat things that are ritually clean. And if you don't do this, you are defiled. And Jesus says, no, it's the things that we say that will make us clean or unclean. It's the things that flow out of our heart that we do that make us clean or unclean. And Peter asserts here, he's speaking a word of truth that has been revealed to him. And he has defined himself in a certain way. We're going to see more about that in a minute. Remember, we're talking about This Is My Story. This is our theme for the year. We're talking about stories. And this month in particular, month of August, we're talking about what makes a great story great. What are the great stories that you can think of that capture your imagination? There are a lot of elements in that story, and probably they're common elements to other great stories. There are things that make great stories great. And then we also said, that great stories have something in them we can identify with. There's something going on that maybe we have in common with the main character or that we've experienced in life. And then we also said that great stories help define us. The stories that we tell, right, say a lot about us, and they help shape our thinking and our experience in life. And so great stories define us. They help define us. Well, today we're going to be talking about how great stories go one step further than that, and they actually give us a future with hope. Great stories give us a future with hope. And so look at this. Peter tells his story, which is that Jesus is the Messiah. And by the way, by story, I don't mean it's not true, because this is true, right? Jesus is Messiah. Peter proclaims it to be so, and Jesus tells him his future. You are Peter. You are the rock, and I will build my church upon this rock. That's Peter's future. The gates of Hades won't prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. That's whatever you forgive will be forgiven. Wow, what a future. What a future is given Peter by the story that he knows and tells. A woman I know who spent years as a nurse told me that when she could get a patient to tell his or her story, and she could listen to that patient's story, that her chances of getting of the patient believing that they got good care would go up. In other words, if a patient was able to tell their story and they felt like they were heard, their sense of the kind of care they got was greater. They thought they got better care. When it comes to our stories, it's amazing how just being able to tell our story and be heard makes things better. And so when we feel listened to, when we feel heard and valued and acknowledged, we're validated, we're blessed. Our stories take on new meaning and can be hopeful. The life cycle theory of Eric and Joan Erickson, and I'm greatly simplifying this here, but they talked about different stages of life, and in particular in the latter stages of life, they said that it's in these latter stages that we look back over our lives and determine whether it's made any difference. And if we sense that we somewhat accomplished life goals, that we made a difference for ourselves and for others, we will be more satisfied with our life. And in particular, we'll feel more hopeful for the future. See, if we can look back and bless the story that has been, we'll have more hope for what will be. That's amazing. When I was a chaplain at a hospital several years ago, there was a harpist who would come in, played the harp. She would come in maybe once a month or every so often, and she had a whole catalog of songs memorized, and she had them memorized by the year that they were popular. And she would ask somebody what year they graduated from high school, and then she would sit down and play several songs from the year they graduated high school. What a gift, right? To go back, whatever we're facing in that hospital bed, to go back and have those songs of our youth, whether that was just a few years ago or decades ago, played for us, provides a space to remember that story, right? author Karen Larson and professor of the psychology of music, Peter Janata, say that the music of our youth offers a benefit that other music cannot, a sense of nostalgia. And far from being a negative thing, they claim that nostalgia boosts our sense that life has meaning, makes us more optimistic about the future, and fosters a stronger sense of connection with other people. And so this hope, this greater community, they come from remembering, retelling, and being able to bless our stories. So important, so powerful to be able to tell our story well. And so stories, I really believe that stories give us a future. But we have to tell good stories, or that is, we have to learn to tell our story well if we're going to get a future out of that with hope. Now, maybe you're skeptical. Maybe you're sitting there thinking, okay, that all sounds very good, and you quoted some psychologists, but can remembering my story really give me a better future? Well, let me put it this way. Great stories allow us to bless the past and hope for a future because they give us vision. Vision. In Proverbs, which is in the Bible, Proverbs tells us that without vision, the people perish. Have you heard that before? Have you heard that proverb, without vision, the people perish? It's translated a lot of different ways. Dr. Scott Cormode defines vision as shared stories of our hope for the future. What is vision but a common story that we have together that's our image of what the future can be? Vision that a church has is the story we see before us that we hope God will lead us to. It's a shared story of our hope for the future. And it's so vital that the Bible teaches us without that shared story of hope together, the people will lose their way. So vital, so important to be able to tell our stories in such a way that it gives us hope for what is yet to be. But if that is true, it is also true that we, many of us, myself included, need to learn how to tell our stories in such a way that we can find that hope. Paul teaches us something like that, I think, this morning when he tells us not to be conformed to this world. That is, don't believe just the stories that you see around you, because they'll discourage you. But be transformed by the renewing of your mind, because there's more to the story than what mere mortals see. There's more going on around us. Jesus transforms us and changes our story triumphantly. It may seem like we're in the gloom of that Saturday, right? But we know what comes next, the joy of the Easter Sunday. And that's our story. That's our story. The story of God's goodness, God's grace, that's unmerited favor we don't deserve. God loves us so much that we can have a hope for the future. It's not in the pride of our goodness or our abilities, but in the hope of what God is doing in our midst, because we know that God is not done with us. What a great and hopeful story. That God wouldn't and won't give up on you. No matter what you've done, no matter what things look like around you, God's not through with your story. Your story is still going somewhere amazing. Several years ago, I was going through a really difficult time. Some Some theologians call it the dark night of the soul. It was just a period of kind of gloom, spiritual gloom. I prayed constantly. Just wasn't hearing God at the moment. Maybe you're in one of those valleys too. The circumstances of my life weren't exactly ideal. I was going through some tough things there as well. And we were on vacation. We were traveling across the country. And we stopped at a roadside scenic view. And there was a half wall to keep you from tumbling over the edge at the, becoming part of the view, right? And on this wall, somebody had spray painted Jeremiah 29:11. And I didn't know if I knew the passage or not. And I was in one of those phases where God seemed to be nudging me to look that up, to see what it was. And it turns out it was a passage I'd heard before, but I didn't know it as Jeremiah 29:11. But it was this: "For surely I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for your welfare and not for your harm, to give you a future with hope." And somehow that became my story. I mean, I'd heard that verse before, but I'd not heard it when I was in the midst of a valley like that. And it just kept speaking to me. And it helped me through that tough time. By the way, this was years ago. We happened to be traveling from Florida to Colorado at the time, and we were in Arkansas. I had no idea that years later, part of our story would be that we would be called here to serve among you. No idea. But it buoyed me at the time. It lifted me up. It shone just a little bit of light on where I was in that time of darkness and hardship, to give me hope that somewhere, somehow, this was going to something good that God had in store for us. And so I began to tell my story a little bit differently. And the story changed. Great stories, they give us hope. They tell us that no matter what we face, others have faced similar trials. In fact, Jesus faced trials that many of us hopefully can never imagine and never will have to face. But whatever we go through, God goes through with us. And when that's your story, there is always hope. Always. Let's learn to tell our stories in that light. Let's learn to bless our stories, knowing that God is in the midst of them and leading somewhere good, that all will be well for those who love the Lord. And so in the light and the hope of Jesus Christ, be blessed, friends. Amen.